Welcome to Drift Away Stories. I'm here to take you on a peaceful journey through time and adventure, where you become the hero of history's greatest moments. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let your mind drift away as we explore worlds beyond your imagination. If these stories help you find rest and escape, consider subscribing for more adventures, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin your journey. The ship lurches beneath your feet with a grinding, scraping sound that seems to come from the very soul of the vessel, followed by an unnatural stillness that makes your blood run cold. You are standing in the first-class smoking lounge of RMS Titanic at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, a crystal tumbler of brandy frozen halfway to your lips as you process what has just happened. Your name is James Whitmore, 35 years old, a successful steel magnate from Pittsburgh, returning from business meetings in London. And in this moment, you realize that something has gone terribly wrong with the ship they called Unsinkable. The other gentlemen in the richly appointed lounge exchange puzzled glances, their conversations about business and politics interrupted by the strange vibration that shuddered through the massive vessel just moments ago. The Titanic's engines, which have provided a constant, reassuring thrum throughout the 4 days since leaving Southampton, have fallen silent for the first time since departure. The absence of that familiar sound creates an eerie quiet that amplifies every creak of the ship's structure and every nervous comment from passengers trying to understand what has occurred. Probably just stopped to fix some minor mechanical issue, suggests Colonel Archibald Gracie, an American writer whose confidence seems forced despite his casual tone. These modern ships have all sorts of safety systems that shut things down at the first sign of trouble. We'll be underway again shortly, mark my words. His reassurance fails to convince anyone, including himself, as the unnatural stillness continues, and no announcement comes from the bridge to explain the situation. You set down your brandy and move toward one of the lounge's large windows, hoping to see something that might explain the ship's sudden stop in the middle of the North Atlantic. The night outside is impossibly clear and calm, with stars reflecting off water so still it resembles black glass. The temperature has been dropping steadily throughout the evening, creating conditions that the crew mentioned were unusual for this time of year. A flat, cold sea that makes spotting hazards more difficult than normal. Through the window, you catch sight of something that sends a chill through your chest, more profound than the Arctic air outside. White chunks of ice are scattered across the forward well deck, glinting in the ship's electric lights like scattered diamonds. Ice that was not there when you entered the smoking lounge an hour ago. Ice that could only have come from one source in these waters, an iceberg large enough to reach the ship's upper decks. The realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. The Titanic, the greatest passenger liner ever built, the ship that experts claimed could not sink, has struck an iceberg in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest land. The grinding sound you heard was not a minor mechanical problem, but the hull of the ship scraping against a mountain of ice that may have caused damage no amount of modern engineering can overcome. Your mind races through everything you know about the ship's construction, gleaned from conversations with designers and engineers during the voyage. The Titanic was built with 16 watertight compartments that can be sealed independently, allowing the ship to survive flooding in multiple sections. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer who is aboard for this maiden voyage, explained that she could survive flooding in any 4 compartments and still remain afloat. But what if the damage extends beyond 4 compartments? What if the unsinkable ship is not as invulnerable as everyone believed? The atmosphere in the smoking lounge shifts dramatically as other passengers notice the ice on the deck and begin to grasp the implications of what they are seeing. Conversations that were casual and relaxed just minutes ago become urgent and worried, with men stepping closer to the windows to get better views of the damage. The confident predictions of quick repairs and immediate departure give way to nervous speculation about how serious the situation might be. "Gentlemen, I suggest we investigate this matter more thoroughly," you announce to the room, your business experience making you comfortable with taking charge in uncertain situations. If the ship has indeed struck an iceberg, we need to understand the extent of the damage and what measures are being taken to address it. Your words catalyze action, as several men agree to accompany you in seeking more information from crew members or other passengers who might have witnessed the collision. The corridors outside the smoking lounge reveal the first signs that this incident is more serious than anyone initially realized. Stewards are moving through the ship with unusual urgency, their normal calm professionalism replaced by barely concealed concern. Passengers are emerging from their cabins in various states of dress, some still in evening wear from the late dinner service, others hastily wrapped in robes and coats. The questions they ask the crew members receive evasive answers that do nothing to calm growing anxiety. Your group makes its way toward the ship's grand staircase, hoping to find officers or senior crew members who can provide authoritative information about the situation. The magnificent first-class areas of the ship, with their ornate woodwork, crystal chandeliers, and luxurious furnishings, seem surreal in the context of what may be developing into a maritime emergency. The contrast between the Titanic's opulent interior and the potentially deadly situation outside creates a dreamlike quality that makes the entire experience feel unreal. At the top of the grand staircase, you encounter Thomas Andrews himself, the ship's designer, deep in conversation with Captain Smith and several other officers. Their faces bear expressions of grave concern that immediately dispel any hopes that this might be a minor incident requiring simple repairs. Andrews holds blueprints of the ship's lower sections, pointing to specific areas while speaking in urgent tones that carry clearly despite his attempts to keep the conversation private. "The first 5 compartments are flooding," you overhear Andrews explain to the captain. "The damage extends further than our original estimates. At the current rate of flooding, the ship has perhaps an hour, maybe 2 at most, before the forward sections pull the bow down far enough to flood the 6th compartment. Once that happens, the mathematics become irreversible." The words hit you like a physical blow, their implications almost too massive to comprehend. The Titanic, the largest and most technologically advanced passenger ship ever built, is not just damaged, she is doomed. The unsinkable ship is going to sink in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, taking with her over 2,000 passengers and crew members who believed they were traveling on the safest vessel ever constructed. Captain Smith's response confirms your worst fears. "How long do we have, Mr. Andrews?" he asks, his voice heavy with the weight of command decisions that will determine the fate of everyone aboard. The captain's legendary experience and calm demeanor seem shaken by the magnitude of the crisis he now faces, a situation unlike anything in his decades of maritime service. "An hour and a half at the outside," Andrews replies, his professional composure barely containing what must be overwhelming grief at seeing his masterpiece condemned to destruction. "Possibly less if the flooding accelerates. We need to begin evacuation procedures immediately if we're going to have any chance of getting everyone off safely." The conversation that follows occurs in hushed tones that don't carry to where you stand, but the body language of the officers makes their conclusions clear. Orders are given that send crew members hurrying in different directions, their missions obviously urgent and critical. The calm, orderly atmosphere that has characterized the voyage since leaving Southampton is giving way to controlled crisis management as the ship's officers implement emergency procedures they hoped never to use. Your business instincts, honed by years of managing complex industrial operations, tell you that this situation is about to deteriorate rapidly once word spreads among the passengers. Over 2,000 people learning simultaneously that their ship is sinking will create panic and chaos that could be more dangerous than the sinking itself. The key to survival will be getting accurate information quickly and making intelligent decisions based on that information rather than waiting for official announcements that may come too late. You return to the smoking lounge to share what you have learned with the other passengers, knowing that the information will spread rapidly throughout the ship, regardless of any attempts to control it. The men who accompanied you on the investigation listen with growing alarm as you describe the conversation between Andrews and Captain Smith, the implications becoming clear even to those with no maritime experience. "We need to prepare for evacuation," you conclude, your words creating the first open acknowledgement that the Titanic's passengers face a life-threatening emergency. The ship's officers are implementing emergency procedures, which means they expect the situation to worsen significantly. We should return to our cabins, gather warm clothing and life preservers, and prepare to abandon ship if necessary. The suggestion that abandoning the Titanic might be necessary seems almost blasphemous, given the ship's reputation for safety and luxury, but the evidence of serious damage is mounting too rapidly to ignore. Other passengers throughout the ship are reaching similar conclusions as word spreads about the ice on the forward decks and the unusual behavior of crew members. The magnificent vessel that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of human engineering achievement has become a death trap floating in some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. Your cabin on A deck provides a commanding view of the ship's port side, where you can observe the crew's emergency preparations with growing alarm. Lifeboats that have served as mere decorations throughout the voyage are being uncovered and prepared for launching, their davits swung out over the ship's side in preparation for lowering. The sight of these small boats suspended over the dark Atlantic brings home the reality of what evacuation will mean, leaving the safety and warmth of the world's largest passenger ship for open boats in freezing water hundreds of miles from land. The mathematics of survival become grimly apparent as you count the lifeboats visible from your position and estimate their capacity against the number of people aboard the ship. Even if every boat is filled to maximum capacity, there is insufficient space for all the passengers and crew. The realization that many people will not survive this disaster, that you yourself may not survive, creates a psychological crisis that threatens to overwhelm rational thought and planning. Your cabin steward, a young man named Patterson, who has provided excellent service throughout the voyage, appears at your door with information that confirms your worst fears. "Mr. Whitmore, sir," he says, his professional composure cracking under the strain of the situation. "The captain has ordered all passengers to report to the boat deck with life preservers. The crew is preparing to lower the lifeboats as a precautionary measure." The euphemistic language cannot disguise the reality that evacuation has begun, though official announcements continue to describe the situation as precautionary rather than desperate. You gather the warmest clothing available, heavy coat, gloves, scarf, knowing that survival in lifeboats will depend as much on staying warm as on staying afloat. The life preserver feels bulky and awkward, but it represents your only protection against the freezing Atlantic water that will kill within minutes anyone unfortunate enough to enter it. The corridors of the ship reveal increasing chaos as passengers and crew members move toward their assigned emergency stations. The calm, orderly atmosphere of a luxury ocean liner has been replaced by barely controlled panic as people begin to understand the magnitude of the crisis they face. Families struggle to stay together while navigating corridors filled with other passengers, all moving toward boat deck positions that may determine who lives and who dies. The boat deck itself presents a scene of controlled chaos that would be impossible to imagine just hours ago when the Titanic seemed like the safest place on Earth. Officers and crew members work frantically to prepare lifeboats for launching while trying to maintain order among passengers who range from calm to hysterical. The ship's band plays music intended to keep spirits up, but their ragtime melodies seem surreal against the backdrop of maritime disaster unfolding around them. Your position near Lifeboat 6 provides a clear view of the evacuation procedures, revealing both the competence of the crew and the inadequacy of the preparations for a disaster of this magnitude. The officers know their emergency procedures and execute them professionally, but the sheer number of people requiring evacuation overwhelms the available resources. The boats that seemed adequate for any conceivable emergency prove woefully insufficient when faced with the reality of total ship loss. The loading of the lifeboats proceeds according to maritime tradition, women and children first. But the implementation of this policy creates agonizing scenes as families are separated and men face the possibility of watching their loved ones sail away while they remain aboard a doomed ship. The civilized veneer of first-class luxury gives way to primal human emotions as people confront their own mortality and that of those they care about most. Your turn at the lifeboat comes sooner than expected, as officers work to fill boats quickly while the ship remains stable enough for safe launching. The choice between staying aboard the relative safety of the Titanic's deck and entering a small boat to be lowered into the freezing Atlantic requires a leap of faith that challenges every survival instinct. But the alternative, remaining aboard a ship that is demonstrably sinking, offers no real choice at all. As you climb into Lifeboat 6, leaving behind the luxury and apparent safety of the greatest passenger ship ever built, you realize that the next few hours will test your courage, resourcefulness, and will to live in ways that no business challenge or personal crisis has ever approached. The Titanic, which was supposed to represent the triumph of human engineering over the forces of nature, is about to become your grave, unless you can survive in an open boat on the North Atlantic until rescue arrives. The descent from the Titanic's boat deck to the dark Atlantic below occurs in stages that transform your understanding of the disaster's magnitude with each passing moment. As Lifeboat 6 begins its jerky journey down the ship's side, the massive scale of the vessel becomes apparent in ways that were impossible to appreciate from aboard her decks. The Titanic's hull stretches away into darkness above and below, a wall of steel that seems to extend infinitely in both directions, making your small wooden boat feel impossibly fragile and insignificant. The crew members operating the davits work with professional competence despite the extraordinary circumstances, but their movements carry an urgency that speaks to the limited time available for evacuation. Above you, the sounds of continued lifeboat loading create a constant reminder that hundreds of people remain aboard the doomed ship, many of whom will not find places in the insufficient number of boats available for rescue. Your fellow passengers in Lifeboat 6 represent a cross-section of Titanic's first-class travelers, though the crisis has stripped away the social distinctions that normally govern interactions between strangers. Mrs. Margaret Brown, the Colorado mining heiress, whose forceful personality has already made her a leader among the boat's occupants, takes charge of organizing the passengers and encouraging those who seem overwhelmed by the situation. Her practical approach to crisis management provides stability that helps prevent panic in the confined space of the lifeboat. Quartermaster Robert Hitchens, the crew member assigned to command your boat, demonstrates the professional seamanship that represents your best hope for survival in the challenging hours ahead. His knowledge of boat handling and navigation will be essential for keeping the lifeboat stable and on course toward potential rescue, but his obvious stress about the overall situation provides sobering reminder of how dire the circumstances have become. The moment when the lifeboat touches the Atlantic surface brings a shocking transition from the relative stability of the ship to the constant motion of a small boat on ocean swells. The water that seemed calm from the Titanic's deck reveals itself to be constantly moving, with waves that seem enormous from the perspective of passengers sitting just inches above the surface. The immediate sensation of vulnerability replaces any lingering sense of security from having escaped the sinking ship. The view of the Titanic from water level provides a perspective that no passenger was ever intended to experience, revealing the ship's condition with horrifying clarity. Her bow has settled noticeably deeper into the water, with the forward well deck now completely submerged and water lapping at the base of the forward superstructure. The angle of the deck, barely noticeable from aboard the ship, becomes dramatically apparent from the lifeboat's position, confirming that the vessel's sinking is progressing exactly as Thomas Andrews predicted. But perhaps most shocking is the sight of the ship's lights, still blazing with the electric brilliance that has characterized the voyage since leaving Southampton. The engineers who remain aboard the doomed vessel continue to maintain power despite the flooding that must be making their work increasingly dangerous. Their dedication to duty provides the lighting that allows evacuation to continue, but it also creates the surreal image of a brightly illuminated luxury liner slowly disappearing into the dark Atlantic. The other lifeboats scattered across the water create a constellation of small lights that emphasize both the scale of the evacuation and its inadequacy. Each boat represents lives saved from the disaster, but the spaces between them on the vast ocean surface make clear how few people have actually been rescued compared to the number who remain aboard the sinking ship. The mathematics of survival, already grim when calculated in terms of lifeboat capacity, become even more sobering when viewed from the perspective of survivors watching their former shipmates face almost certain death. Quartermaster Hitchens begins the difficult task of rowing away from the Titanic, explaining that proximity to a sinking ship creates dangerous suction that can pull small boats down with the larger vessel. His orders to put distance between the lifeboat and the ship generate protests from passengers who want to remain close enough to rescue additional survivors, but his maritime experience overrides emotional appeals in favor of actions necessary to save those already in the boat. The physical demands of rowing in freezing conditions become apparent immediately, as the effort required to move the heavily loaded lifeboat through the Atlantic swells exceeds what most passengers expected. Your business experience has kept you in reasonable physical condition, but the combination of cold air, physical exertion, and stress creates exhaustion that accumulates rapidly. The rotation of rowing duties among able-bodied passengers becomes essential for maintaining progress away from the danger zone around the sinking ship. Mrs. Brown's leadership proves invaluable for maintaining morale and organization within the lifeboat as the reality of the situation settles over the survivors. Her practical approach to crisis management includes organizing warm clothing distribution, ensuring that everyone has adequate protection against the freezing air, and maintaining the spirits of passengers who might otherwise succumb to despair. Her refusal to accept defeat provides an example that inspires others to focus on survival rather than the magnitude of the disaster. The sounds from the Titanic carry clearly across the water, creating an audio record of the ship's final hours that proves more disturbing than the visual evidence of her condition. The band continues playing, their music providing a soundtrack that seems both heroic and tragic, given the circumstances. More disturbing are the human sounds, voices calling across the water, mechanical noises from the ship's interior, and the occasional crash as heavy objects break loose and fall within the sinking vessel. As the Titanic's angle increases and her condition deteriorates, the lights that have illuminated the evacuation begin to flicker and fail as the engine rooms flood and electrical systems succumb to the rising water. The gradual dimming of the ship's lighting creates an atmosphere of increasing doom that affects everyone in the lifeboats, making the disaster feel more real and immediate than when the brightly lit vessel seemed to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The moment when the ship's lights fail completely, plunging the Titanic into darkness, except for a few emergency lanterns, marks a psychological turning point for the lifeboat survivors. The magnificent vessel that represented the pinnacle of human achievement just hours ago has become a dark silhouette against the stars, her death throes visible primarily through the sounds that carry across the water and the changing angle of her remaining lights. The final breakup of the Titanic occurs with sounds that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. The groaning of steel under impossible stress, the crash of heavy machinery breaking loose inside the ship, and the roar of escaping air as compartments flood completely. The sight of the world's largest passenger ship breaking apart and disappearing into the Atlantic creates trauma that no amount of business experience or life preparation could have anticipated. The silence that follows the Titanic's final plunge proves almost as disturbing as the sounds of her destruction, broken only by the voices of people struggling in the freezing water who have little hope of survival without immediate rescue. The temperature of the Atlantic at this location will kill within 15 minutes, making rescue efforts both urgent and largely futile, given the distance between lifeboats and the scattered survivors. Quartermaster Hitchens faces the agonizing decision of whether to row back toward the site of the sinking to attempt rescues, knowing that the lifeboat is already overloaded and that approaching the area where people are struggling in the water could result in the boat being swamped by desperate survivors attempting to climb aboard. His professional judgment that such a rescue attempt would likely result in additional deaths conflicts with the moral imperative to help people who are calling for assistance. The debate within the lifeboat about rescue attempts reveals the moral complexity of survival situations, where helping others may jeopardize the safety of those already saved. Mrs. Brown advocates for attempting rescues despite the risks, while other passengers argue that their primary responsibility is to the people already in the boat. The decision ultimately rests with Hitchens, whose maritime authority gives him final say over the boat's operations. The hours that follow the Titanic's sinking pass with agonizing slowness as the lifeboat survivors cope with cold, fear, and uncertainty about whether rescue will arrive before exposure claims additional lives. The temperature continues dropping as the night progresses, creating conditions that challenge the survivors' ability to maintain body heat, despite the warm clothing and blankets available in the boat. Your business experience proves valuable for organizing survival efforts within the lifeboat, helping to coordinate resource distribution and maintain morale among passengers who range from calm to near hysterical. The leadership skills developed through years of managing complex industrial operations translate surprisingly well to crisis management in a lifeboat, though the stakes are higher than any business decision you have ever faced. The search for rescue ships becomes a constant preoccupation as survivors scan the horizon for lights that might indicate approaching vessels. Every star that appears low on the horizon generates hope that proves false, while actual ship lights remain frustratingly absent despite the distress signals that were sent before the Titanic's sinking. The knowledge that other ships operate in these shipping lanes provides hope, but the vast scale of the Atlantic makes the chances of timely rescue seem increasingly remote. Mrs. Brown's efforts to maintain morale include organizing singing and conversation that distract from the cold and fear while building group cohesion that proves essential for survival. Her refusal to accept defeat influences other passengers to focus on positive outcomes rather than dwelling on the magnitude of the disaster they have experienced. The psychological aspects of survival prove as important as the physical challenges of staying warm and maintaining strength. The first light of dawn brings both relief and renewed anxiety as the survivors can finally see their situation clearly. The ocean stretches to the horizon in every direction without any sign of land or rescue ships, emphasizing how isolated the lifeboats are in the vast Atlantic. But the daylight also allows better communication between boats and more effective organization of survival efforts across the scattered flotilla of Titanic survivors. The sight of other lifeboats spread across the water provides evidence that the evacuation saved more lives than seemed possible during the chaotic final hours aboard the ship. But it also makes clear how many people must have perished when the vessel sank. The mathematics of survival remain grim. Even if every lifeboat is filled to capacity, the majority of the Titanic's passengers and crew have been lost to the disaster. Your own survival through the night creates complex emotions that resist easy categorization. Relief at being alive combines with guilt about those who were not so fortunate, while appreciation for the competence of the crew members who organized the evacuation mixes with anger about the inadequate lifeboat capacity that made the disaster far worse than necessary. The experience has transformed your understanding of human capability and limitation in ways that will influence your perspective for the rest of your life. The arrival of RMS Carpathia on the morning horizon creates a moment of pure joy that validates the hope that sustained the survivors through the long, cold night. The sight of the rescue ship approaching at full speed provides confirmation that the distress signals were received and that professional mariners are coming to evacuate the lifeboats and transport survivors to safety. The rescue operation conducted by Carpathia's crew demonstrates the maritime professionalism and humanitarian spirit that represent the best aspects of seafaring tradition. Despite the challenges of taking aboard hundreds of survivors from small boats in Atlantic swells, the rescue proceeds efficiently and safely, with every lifeboat occupant brought aboard the rescue vessel without additional casualties. Your first moments aboard Carpathia bring overwhelming gratitude for the ship's officers and crew, who have risked their own vessel and passengers to respond to the Titanic's distress call. The warmth, food, and medical attention provided to survivors represent basic human needs that take on profound significance after a night of uncertainty about whether such comforts would ever be available again. The journey to New York aboard Carpathia provides time for reflection on the disaster's meaning and its impact on your understanding of technology, safety, and human nature. The Titanic's sinking has revealed both the limitations of engineering confidence and the capacity for heroism that emerges when people face life-threatening crises. The experience has changed your perspective on risk, responsibility, and the importance of preparedness for situations that seem impossible until they occur. As Carpathia approaches New York Harbor, you realize that your survival of the Titanic disaster represents both an ending and a beginning. The life you lived before the ship struck the iceberg seems impossibly distant and naive, replaced by understanding of how quickly circumstances can change and how important it is to appreciate the fragility and preciousness of human existence. The businessman who boarded the ship in Southampton has been transformed into someone who understands that true wealth lies not in industrial success, but in the relationships and experiences that provide meaning beyond material achievement. The sight of New York's skyline as Carpathia enters the harbor creates emotions that no amount of business success ever generated. Profound gratitude for survival, deep sorrow for those who were lost, and renewed appreciation for the solid ground and human community that represents safety and home. Your survival of the greatest maritime disaster in history has provided lessons about courage, leadership, and the importance of maintaining hope even when circumstances seem hopeless.